Welcome, Rishi. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you, Michael?
Not bad, not bad. Yo, like it's so funny because I was thinking, right? We've been friends for so long. I knew you were working as an interaction designer in GM, but I never really actually got to know, what the heck is an interaction designer. So, yeah, tell us about like what exactly is it?
So, interaction design goes by several names. So, I can call myself an interaction designer, user experience designer, product designer. If you search up online, there's all sorts of um, different interpretations to these titles, and there are slight differences.
Wait,
But
so you an interaction designer or a product designer?
interaction designer would more accurately represent what I do, but my other teammates are also titled product designers, so like we kind of use them interchangeably mostly in this industry.
I see.
Um, but you can go also by user experience designer. It depends on what your preferences really. But there are some subtle differences between the two. But for at least at a junior level, they're pretty much the same. So, to answer your question, what does an interaction designer do? Um, we basically conceptualize, uh, make a mock-up, so kind of like a demo of the uh, user interfaces that we would like to see in um, software platforms before they are actually implemented. So it's basically coming up with how things will work at a high level and then making the uh, concrete screens for them in terms of their look and feel, the form and behavior. And after that, providing that as the requirements or the specifications of the software that needs to be built to match the way we as interaction designers have a vision for seeing how it would play out.
All right, so let's take it from the beginning. So if I don't know anything about what you do, because obviously I do know some. So you're working for GM. Like, what kind of stuff do you make? And like, um, what is what is it that you're designing, interaction wise, and how do you integrate your job into what is actually going on? So like, give us some context into like what are you doing?
Yeah, so at General Motors, I work on the infotainment team. So the infotainment is the what most people would identify as the touchscreen looking thing in the middle of your car, um, you know, r- between the driver's seat and the passenger seat, and um, my my responsibilities on that infotainment system is to determine what the overall behavior, look and feel of the settings app is. For example, for example, if you have a Android-based device, it kind of looks like a tablet that's in the middle of your car, right? You have a settings app that's customized to General Motors settings. So, on a typical Android device, you'd only have settings like for your Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, stuff like that. But on a vehicle, you would also have things like your headlights or remotely unlocking locking doors or a variety of other features that you would only find inside a vehicle. So the context by which I work on is, you know, people on our teams would have their own module that they would be responsible for within the infotainment system, and we're responsible for how it should work from a behavioral standpoint. So software developers usually come with questions about once they're in their testing phase. Oh, what about this edge case, such as let's say I take the car, I change it from our gas mode, where it's completely on, and you uh, put it, turn up the car. When you try to access certain menus for a component that's powered off, let's say when the car is off, you can no longer turn on your wipers. So can you access the settings for whether wipers will run automatically, or will they be triggered manually, right?
Wait, but don't that usually happen physically with the stuff under the wheels? Like why would people go and use an infotainment system for that?
So for wipers, they wouldn't necessarily have like most of the settings for the wiper system would be on the physical handle that you have on the near the steering wheel. However, there could be an advanced feature related to um, whether there's the you can adjust the speed sensitivity, for
Right,
example.
right.
So certain presets that you would only toggle once or twice throughout the duration of your car usage, pretty much. It's
All
not
right,
something you would go. It starts raining. Let me go to my settings app. Let me change the settings.
right. So like, let's say you got someone. I don't know how this works. Is there someone who comes in and say, hey, like, let's get rid of the wiper speed under the wheel, and then let's put it onto a touchscreen, and then you go, okay, let's see how we do that. Or as a product designer, do you actually get to say, hey, I actually think we should we should put these things in the infotainment system, but not these things.
So we can make sure of both. So the first scenario we described is somewhat, let's say either the program management team, the marketing team, or the systems engineering team. They could say that, hey, for the next year we will um, be moving this physical feature over to something on the infotainment system. And for that, please come up with some designs as to how you think it would work on the infotainment system. So I've had that scenario occur, and I've also had the other scenario occur where I feel like, you know what, this needs to be designed a bit differently than what we have today. Here's my suggestion, and we would file a sort of like a ticket in our internal feature list tracking tool. Um, and it would be vetted by the program management team, by the executive directors of both the engineering team as well as the um, user interface and user experience design team. And it would be prioritized accordingly based on what other features are rolling um, in conjunction with things like where the business team and marketing team wants to take it, as well as the product managers.
Wait, so do you actually? So let's say at this point they say the team say there's somebody out there think that this might be a good feature, or like how does this stuff come up? Like, do you get to test with people and say, hey guys, what you think? Run a focus group or something, or like how does that process work
So yeah,
into
one
deciding like what you're doing exactly?
right. Um, that process, it again, that could be different based on the organization you work with. But at General Motors, that process is, you know, you could get a push for a certain feature. We are going to be moving forward with this feature, and consequently, um, come up with the best possible design. So it's up to us as to how we want to lay it, how many buttons we want to use on the infotainment screen, um, and basically figure out what the user flow will be like. Um, but oftentimes, we do have to go through something called user research testing, or just user testing, which is basically we come up with a few different options, and we can have you have option A, you have option B, and we show both to a candidate who's representative of our target market, and we collect feedback on what uh, what they think of each of the designs by asking not very open-ended questions, but rather very specific questions, so that we can get a more specific and meaningful answer. And oftentimes, this user testing is conducted in a way that leads to you ask non-leading questions to get the least biased response. And often user testing and user research is actually um, a field it's like a sibling field to user experience design. So there's user experience design, which is what I work with, and then there's also user testing, which can be a different team, but at a smaller company, because GM is a fairly large company, but at a smaller company, you could be responsible for doing both aspects, the design as well as the user testing to validate. Basically, user testing helps you justify the design decisions you make so that you make an informed design decision on why you feel your alternative that you've selected is the best.
So let's take this window wiper thing as an example, because it's interesting to me. So like, first of all, did you actually do that? Or, like, is that something that you did?
No, in fact, this window
Oh,
wiper is a very trivial small example. I can't even remember the exact setting that there is in the infotainment setting.
okay. Let's say that that's the thing that, the marketing team comes in and say, hey, instead of something on the wheel, we want to put it into the infotainment system.
Mm-hmm.
So step one, they say, hey, like, we think we're gonna we're gonna have to do this. So as a interaction designer, do you right now go talk to the people and say, hey, let's round up 100 people and ask them what they think, or like conduct some sort of user testing? Or do you actually design it first and then show it to people?
Usually, as an interaction designer, your goal would be to come up with um, what you feel your best designs are. And usually, before you go and do user testing, you would review it with your peers because it's more efficient to get the design input of other professionals. And because it's it's a little more rare that you come across a design challenge that's completely unique in its own circumstances. There's usually patterns and heuristics and guidelines that you can follow to sort of arrive at the best um, solution. So for that would be the first pass is to review it yourself, review it with your peers. After that, then you would do user testing if you feel like you need further validation as to whether people will find this easy enough to use. And oftentimes, what you can also do is you can, well, it's a term that we call benchmarking, which is basically taking a look at what others have done. For example, even though we work with an Android-based operating system at GM for our infotainment, we may take a look at what the iPhone has done for certain menus, the wordings of certain dialogues, to kind of see what they've done, or we may look at what Mercedes has launched in their most recent vehicle to kind of get an idea of what kind of design exploration have they done. So there's a variety of first pass tests that you can do before you actually go through the process of recruiting participation participants for user testing.
Right. So the design phase. Do you have to draw stuff up? Do you have to know how to use the Adobe Designer? Like, at this point, is it a pure kind of artistic expression of how the UI would look like?
So if I clarify, you're asking what are the different phases and stages of design?
Yeah. So in this part, when you're designing it, are you designing it on like a Adobe software or Paint? Well, not a Paint probably, but some sort of visual design software. Nothing to do with code, nothing to do with product, and just design stuff out in an artistic expression sort of way, and then show it to people. Is that how the thing starts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so quite often when we're ideating, we may ideate, on a whiteboard or just a regular pencil and paper, right? And sort of come up with a general gist of how things should work, just so that we don't close off any alternatives too early on. And once you have a few alternatives laid out, you would move towards a wireframing tool. So the one that we use is called Axure RP, AXURE, um, and that's a tool that it kind of looks like Microsoft PowerPoint, where you can drag rectangles and circles and but it also has a mix of kind of like JavaScript where you can specify if you select a button or a rectangle, you can specify an on-click action. So if I click this button, take me to page two.
Right,
Um,
right.
so you can kind of program it with this hyperlinking. You can have some animations, fade in, fade out. You can hide, do conditional hiding, so that similar like if you click on a second tab, it refreshes the entire screen so that it shows you the content relating to that second tab rather than what was on the first tab. So it's quite powerful and it's as easy as to use as probably PowerPoint is, in my opinion.
So now you've designed this thing, the whole interaction, you show it to people, and you get a bunch of response. Isn't now your job to analyze those response and say, based on what this guy said about this thing over here, we may or may not want this feature. Can you give an example of what that would look like?
Um, yeah, it's possible we may come across a situation where we don't want a feature uh, so that we don't clutter the user interface that's already been working well. Um, have I personally had to do that? No.
No, I mean like when you design the Azure interactions and you show it to people, right? Is that what happens?
Yeah. So usually we can come up with the interaction, and when we come up with the interaction, not necessarily does it look pixel perfect, right? Like the colors of the buttons may be just gray and black. It may not be styled nicely. Well, usually, what
Mm-hmm.
happens is interaction design is about coming up with the general functionality and the way things will behave. Uh, but then all the aesthetics are usually handled by someone who does professional graphic design or visual design. So,
Right. So you design
um,
the interaction, they design the graphics, you combine it together, you show it to people, um, and do you get to analyze, like, is your net logical next step to analyze what people said, and you make the decision of whether or not, things get designed this way?
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, cool. So now, what kind of oversight do you have? Like, do you have to report to a boss and say, "Hey, here's my design," and present it to him, and like, what does that look like?
Um, there's a variety. It depends on the significance of the feature or item that we're working on. So like if it's a really small task, and it's just like trying to figure out what happens in this very edge case, um, quite often I will just make the call myself and say, here's how it should work. Please, software development team, implement it this way, because some things are just said and done faster than it is trying to um, seek seek the approval for things that are really straightforward and follow behavior, um, or we already have sort of guidelines based on what we've done in the past, so we can use that as reference to justify our current design decisions. Um, in terms of oversight, really, it's very context dependent. Sometimes, it's just nice to, it's not always that we need approval per se, but it's just nice to have the input of other people in general. It's collaboration is never discouraged in this space because great ideas can come from anywhere, and so I personally enjoy that aspect where we can bump off ideas off of people, especially people who have been in the industry longer than I have.
Do you feel like you have a lot of freedom here, doing like to kind of design whatever you think is fit?
Um, in certain contexts, yes. So the context where I have a lot of freedom is for an app that runs not not as a core app that's part of the vehicle, but rather something that you can install afterwards, like GM has this downloadable thing similar to the Google Play Store or Apple App Shop, and on those apps, things we can send regular uh, application updates. So the risk isn't as high. Whereas what the core vehicle apps, such as the settings app or the audio app, um, or climate, these apps are shipped with the vehicle, and there usually are not any system-wide software updates that are issued to the customer after they purchase the vehicle, like how we get Windows updates on our laptops. That concept um, isn't as practical for the vehicle sometimes, just because of how much different components that get affected when an update could occur. And not
Okay.
saying it wouldn't happen in the future. So there's that critical impact aspect. So if the impact is low, then there's more freedom. But if the impact is high, then there isn't as much freedom, and you have a lot of constraints as to what the software development team is capable of implementing based on the number of hours they have in their work week and what's been allotted to their sprint cycles. So if a feature isn't a high priority, um, we we may only devote a few hours of their time to actually implement it.
So you're not a part of the software development team?
No, we I mostly provide support to them on how things should work and should look. I don't.
Wow, that's so interesting. Because I mean, obviously, you were my partner in crime as a pretty genius software developer, I would say. So you don't actually do any coding anymore?
That is correct. I don't do coding.
Wow, I did not know that. Okay, so well, you got a 4 year computer engineering degree for to do that. That's pretty cool. Um, so like, what kind of qualifications do you think you need to do something like this?
So I am a very rare exception to this industry, and I say that because I don't have the typical career path that one would take to become an interaction designer. Generally speaking, people would have a undergraduate degree of some sort, usually in the field of um, I I think I think either visual design is one, or there could be human factors is another. Um, so, and then some people even have masters in either user experience. Um, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the academic paths are, to be honest. Because I'll explain my path, which was to study computer engineering, and followed by that, I realized um, in the startup you and I started together, um, we tried to have this dynamic where uh, we were creating a software so that so that individuals with arm difficulties could use computers with their eyes, and through that process of creating a software, which we were successful in creating, not necessarily in commercializing it, but through that process, what I learned was I enjoy coming up more about how the software will look and work than it is to the actual execution of making the code work. So
Mm-hmm.
creating those ideas and being able to identify that I that we were able to create interactions that were more richer and user friendly than a company valued at $1 billion wasn't able to do in the past 15 years, even though the technology permitted, indicated that I had um, found something that was that that I enjoy, and B, that I can actually provide value to um, in the industry. So being able to identify the right aspects of my own uh, personal, like, objectives in my career, what
Right.
was quite exciting.
Right. So would you think it's safe to say that somebody with an undergrad degree in pretty much any field, but has a project, um, doing some sort of interaction design with people, would help them kind of get this job?
I would say so. I think so. The reason why I feel interaction design is open to a lot of different um, career backgrounds or previous educational backgrounds is because one, good ideas can come from anywhere, regardless of your age and your previous experiences. And two, you just should have a strong, I would say, passion, desire, or um, skill or talent. Skill or talent are probably more applicable, um, and you should be able to come up with new things. You should be able to look at your day to day usages of technology, or even things that don't have technology, such as um, the way doorknobs are designed, or you should be
Right.
interested by the imperfections of how current things are designed, whether they're technological or mechanical, however it may be. And you should be able to find imperfections, be like, if I were to improve this, I would improve it such way, and I know it would work so much better for so many more people, and be able to weigh those pros and cons. So the engineering degree did help in providing um, a very structured and analytical way of making trade-offs and un- identifying the best solution based on a set of criteria. I think that's something engineering taught really well. Um, but the overall coming up with innovative designs sort of comes sometimes from your own intuition. It's not something that it sort of comes with a mindset or a way of thinking. Um, it, I'm not sure how well it can actually be taught. Other than you can be taught a lot of different practices, but until you really understand why things are done the way they are, and you have a thorough appreciation for the design decisions that may have taken to create, the way Gmail has its different buttons laid out the way it is, and why they've chosen the placement from left to right. And until you have a solid appreciation of why things have come to be the way they are, um, that would be the tipping point to understand whether or not interaction design is a field for you.
If you so in the interview that you went through, can you share what kind of areas were they interested in testing?
So I would say I was a bit different in my interview approach. Um, the manager, who is my manager now, wasn't all that, you know, the standard parts to other interviews. Those aspects were, hey, could you tell us who you are, what was your background, where did you study, and tell us about yourself. That question will definitely be there, but then it's about the way you describe your experiences. So for me, I the role that I was being interviewed for is interaction design, but the vast majority of my experience comes from engineering. Prior up
Mm-hmm.
to there, like 2 years of co-op term experiences, and then there's the additional um, 4 months of interaction design work and other startup related work that we did um, through that eye tracking startup, right? And when so but the key there is to emphasize on the interaction design work and not the engineering. But the engineering aspect is still valuable. So being able to relate how all those things match up to their overall company vision. So, for example, how I did it was I started with hardware, my understanding of hardware, different platforms of sensors and that sort of stuff, because that relates because a vehicle also has a lot of hardware and sensors, of course, right? Then I talked about the firmware, because that's the next level in the software. that controls all the various hardware, and I had co-op experiences in that as well, and coursework, right? Thereafter, there's the operating system, and the software development team here at GM Infotainment purely works with the Android operating system a lot, and consequently, being able to converse with them is an important skill to have. And then my application level software development indicates what the user sees once the software is finally written. So having experience of everything from their entire technological stack and being able to articulate that in context of what GM does as a company, I think that was beneficial. And the second
Right.
aspect, so that's how I related most of my past experience. And then my relevant experience was conveyed through a live demo where I brought my laptop with an eye tracker, and I was able to show, um, you know, here's what the previous how this was designed by other companies. Here's how I designed this interaction, and I was able to give a live demo. And of course, using computers with your eyes is a pretty cool thing if you've never done it before. So
Right.
um, there's a certain in-person impressiveness to that. So that's sort of how I was able to change my career by showing a demo of my potential and showing a demo of my accomplishments.
That's really cool. I didn't know that. Um, can you share in the ballpark? Because when you got the job, you were 20, what, 4 years old, and you just graduated like a
Yep.
year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Basically, your first full time job. Can you share in the ballpark, like how much were you getting paid?
Ooh, that's not something I usually share. But if you want, at least at General Motors, I'm pretty sure it makes more than software developers. Um,
What's the range? What's the range there for just your peers?
so the range is usually somewhere between, at least at General Motors, somewhere between 80K and 120K.
Right, I see. Wow, that's that's significant. Um, cool. So, what is something that you find really challenging about what you do?
Challenging. You see,
Like, there are good challenges that you enjoy, and there are bad challenges where you're like, I have to put up with these. Are there both of those things? And, like, what are they?
so challenges. I feel that a challenge is something that you define as relative to something else that you've previously found easy or not, right? It's when you have something more difficult. You see, most of my previous career was in software development, and for me that was a challenge because it was not something that came to me naturally because I only wanted to see the end result. My goal was never to debug code to make it work. I just wanted it to work. I just wanted to see the output correct, right? So when I went from doing something that wasn't natural to now doing what I uh, really feel like doing, which is designing things, collaborating with a variety of different uh, talent and discipline across the company, and coming up with solutions that fit well for both the business side as well as the end user or customer for our products. Um, that was a natural transition, and for me, I this taking on this role became in absence of challenges just because of my perspective of having done things which weren't natural to me. So the fact that I found something that was natural to, you know, coming up with better designs was something I would do regardless. And you wouldn't have to really pay me to do it. It's nice that I can monetize on it. Uh, but if I really have to come up with challenges of this field, um, sometimes the challenges could be trying to fit a lot of different uh, goals and present it in a simple and succinct way. Creating a simple design that can be easily used by everyone and understood is probably the biggest challenge, because you never know if you've landed on the very best design, because you never know what you don't know. um, and so it's sort of exploring that unknown space, and really thinking outside the box that can become the challenge. But usually, without I don't want to discourage I don't want to discourage design as a whole, but quite often you can find something that's good enough, and understanding when you have what meets your criteria, and defining that criteria well for what an acceptable user interface is important. And so usually you can find something you like. So there's that challenge of coming up with something that's simpler and sort of like optimizing your design. Um, so there's that aspect. What's the challenge I don't like? I don't think I have something about my role, because I understand all the different stakeholders that I work with. So I can imagine someone else in my position may not have liked having to communicate to engineers, for example, how to write their software or make it work. Whereas because I have um, a vast amount of exposure to uh, things like the business requirements, product management, and software development, and because I've had exposure, I can relate to all those different thinking hats. Consequently, for me, communicating with others hasn't been a challenge.
Sounds awesome, man. That sounds like a job that you're really enjoying right now.
I most certainly am.
That's cool. Okay, so um, if you were to start from the beginning before you enter university, what would you say? Like, if you knew that you were gonna, if you were helping somebody before they, you know, were choosing a major, to kind of get this job, what are the skills that you think they should definitely learn? What are the things that you think they should definitely do, um, to kind of get in your shoes and do what you do?
So, so the question is, let's say you're in grade 11 or 12 right now.
Yeah, let's say you're 18, right? You graduated,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you're looking at this interaction design job. Sounds pretty good. Sounds pretty sweet. I want to try it out. First of all, can you get an intern? Right? Is that an option in the field? Do people do that? And two, how would they build up their experiences and build up their portfolio or their resume to get to a position where they will be interviewed and pass the interview?
Mm-hmm. So interaction design isn't a very well um, isn't the most publicly made aware field. In fact, I didn't know it was a thing until after I did my startup.
Yeah.
And even after doing my startup, I still didn't know for another 8 months, until I needed to find a different job, right? And that's when I looked at my career options. It's not something that your career counselor may even be aware of, because it's actually a sort of like a specialty that's arised in the usage of technology. It's a phenomenon that's occurred where the people who've typically written software, they're good at writing code, and then project managers are good at getting the code done by a particular schedule and planning things out, and then the business side understands what the customer wants, or will need to monetize it. But the idea of how things are arranged on a screen isn't just about visual design, where it's all pixels and graphics and making things look nice. So it's sort of organic interaction design, user experience design, something that's sort of come out in the last 20, 30 years, as it's becoming more and more aware, uh, because of in these interaction design teams formed at larger organizations, showing that it's a lot more expensive. It's about 100 times more expensive to change a shipped product than it is to reiterate before it's even the first line of it is coded. That's essentially the purpose of interaction design. So that because of that reason, it's sometimes it was reserved for people who had moved along in their career, have seen how all the products work at a particular company, and then they get become sort of this brain center within the company. But for interaction design, starting out as a high schooler today, how would they come up? I mean, you can kind of do any degree that's centered around technology, I feel. Um, and why I would recommend a degree is just because having a set of credentials to show that you know how to learn and you know how to um, solve a problem, optimize, and essentially you also need to know how to work well with others and recognize um, there's also all sorts of different perspectives out there on how you can go about your job. Communication skills are also critical because there's definitely a lot more interpersonal communication compared to when you're doing software development. Um, and yeah, I don't know what if there's a cookie cutter way exactly on how to get this job. Some people may need to do a master's to get the kind of job I have. Um,
Do you think working on a either a business or a project that has a lot to do, like heavily involved with human computer interaction, um, would be a huge plus, or would be something that um, gets you over the hump?
I am biased in that answer because I am myself am evidence of that.
Yeah.
So yes, um, I I think that's the only reason why I'm now in this field, right?
Do you think
So
someone who is a pure designer can do it? Do you think, say, someone who studied graphic design or arts degree can find their way into doing what you do?
if they can understand that it goes beyond the aesthetics and understand the importance of functional and behavioral design, yes, but that's it's not necessarily the arts degree or the degree that you get. It really comes down to how you think as a person, and how well your style of thinking represents others. For example, growing up, say instructions were handed out to in grade 9 for how to complete your assignment. I was always one of the few people in the class that couldn't figure out completely how to follow instructions because of the way certain things were worded. And if it isn't the best wording possible, I may not understand it. So I always knew I was an outlier when it comes to understand. But usually, what I can understand, everybody else can understand. So if you can make me understand something, you can make anyone understand something. So that was one of my weaknesses growing up, but now that's my strength because if once I figure out how a design should work and feel, it usually works for a lot of other people. It's just that sometimes my caveat right now would be because I'm technologically advanced, it still may be a little too um, cumbersome or complicated for some other people. But that's something I'm working on simplifying. So it really comes down to personality more than it does the exact credentials that you have led into. But basic, but basically, in this career, I believe because there's no real established mechanism for getting in, like you know, in the finance field, you would want if you want to be an accountant, you need a designation for chartered accountant or CPA, right? Whereas um, because it's still an emerging field, and people here recognize that people can come from different backgrounds and experiences. Um, just finding a way to demonstrate what the your talent and potential by just basically showing improvements across a product that you've chosen compared to what else exists in the market and showing why your improvements are better, I think that's a great start. So yes, to answer your question, a project in this area that you take up on your own, and you can show that you did it on your own and really become the expert in that project area, and being able to show improvements from a usability standpoint would be a
Mm-hmm.
great way to show your credentials.
Right, and just so people know what we were talking about, the project that you and I worked on was almost purely focused on interaction, human computer interaction, right? It was about helping people who had motor disabilities, and they were having trouble interacting with computers, and they were having trouble trying to use a interface that's designed for fingers, and these fingers doesn't work very well, and try to show them a different way to control computers, different way of organizing the screen, organizing objects on the screen, trying to come up with hacky ways to solve an interaction problem. And I think that boded for you very well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rishi. That's all my questions. I hope everybody listening can find some inspiration. I certainly did. I quite honestly didn't know that something like this existed. Even if I did, I would think that it's some sort of hybrid role with either graphics designer, which are mainly UI designer these days in tech companies, or somehow merged with software engineering. But apparently, it's by itself standalone job, and you get paid fairly well to do that. So kudos for finding it.
Thank you, Miguel. This was a pleasure having this interview with you.
All right.